This is Professor Sackett-Taylor here, and today I want to talk about the market forces of supply and demand. This is chapter 3 from Principles of Macroeconomics, and this topic really forms a foundation for everything we're going to cover for the rest of the semester. We're going to look at the fundamentals of how markets work, and then look at the individual determinants of demand and supply. Once we have those two things down, we can put them together into a single model and look at how supply and demand interact to create equilibrium prices and quantities in our markets. So a market is a place for exchange. Firms are the producers. They supply goods or services. Households are the consumers. They demand goods or services that are produced by the firm. Exchange happens through prices that are established in a market setting, and market prices can change due to supply and demand factors. A market is any place that buyers and sellers can meet and interact and move forward with a transaction. It doesn't have to be a physical place. Grocery stores are markets, H&M is a market, eBay is a market, this hot dog stand is a market. A market exists any place where someone has something that another person wants to buy, and a transaction happens when that person is willing to pay and able to pay what that seller is asking for in return. A market economy is an economy where resources are allocated among households and firms with little to no government interference. In the United States, we live in primarily what could be considered a market economy for most goods and services. Producers and consumers in a market economy are completely self-interested. Producers are interested in selling products and making a profit, and consumers are interested in buying products that increase their happiness. What we call the invisible hand of the market is what guides us towards using these resources towards their highest value. Basically what this says is that although no individual is intending to promote market efficiency, by simply acting in their own self-interest, they will push the market to this outcome. Now, the authors here call this the best outcome. We're going to talk more deeply in person when we have time for discussion about whether market efficiency is in fact the best outcome, because with efficiency, you tend to have to make trade-offs with equality and justice. More on that to come. Let's talk about competitive markets. A market is competitive if it has these specific criteria met. First, there are many people who are buyers of this product and many people who are sellers of this product. The good itself, the product itself that's made by individual producers doesn't vary in quality too much, and it's produced in a similar way. And we want to say that no individual in a competitive market has the power to influence the price in the direction that they choose, that the prices really are going to be determined by the interaction of supply and demand. So let's first start with the demand side of the equation. This is the consumer side of the market. The quantity demanded, which is different than demand, the quantity demanded is the amount of a good that buyers are willing and able to purchase, not produce, at a current price. So at a given price, how much do people want? The law of demand states that holding everything else equal, ceteris paribus, there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. That is, as things get more expensive, people want less of them. Quantity demanded goes down. As things get cheaper, people will want more of them. That is, quantity demanded goes up. So whatever direction price goes in, quantity demanded goes in the opposite direction. This is the law of demand. A demand schedule is a way of representing the relationship between price and quantity demanded in a table. If we were to take that table and graph those points as ordered pairs, this is what gives us the demand curve. Here's an example of a demand schedule in the form of a table. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, is somebody who has professed a love for healing crystals. So we'll use him as an example. Here you can see the price of healing crystals, and then at that price, the number of crystals demanded by one individual, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. At higher prices, you can see that The Rock demands fewer crystals, and at lower prices, he demands more of them. This is showing us that The Rock obeys the law of demand. When things are more expensive, we demand fewer, and when things are cheaper, we demand more. If we were to graph these as ordered pairs, we always, as a protocol in economics, will put quantity demanded on the x-axis and price on the y-axis every time. The inverse graph is actually a different model. Here you can see that each point corresponds to the quantity demanded at a particular price. The demand curve is therefore downward sloping because of the law of demand. In other words, as prices get cheaper, we demand more. And the opposite is true. As prices get more expensive, we demand less. This gives us the negative slope on a demand curve. Market demand is simply a horizontal sum of all individual quantity demanded for each buyer in the market. It's as if I was able to go to each individual and say, how many do you want? How many do you want? How many do you want? And then added them all together. So for example, if I had two people in this market, The Rock and someone named Emma, we could see that they each individually have their own demand schedule. This is based on personal preferences and other factors like income, which we'll talk about in a second. But if I wanted to know what market demand for healing crystals are, I would simply add up the demand from The Rock and the demand from Emma to get the new market demand quantity at each particular price. So like I said at the very beginning of this video lecture, market prices can change due to factors in demand. However, here we really want to make sure that we are using the right language to talk about differences in quantity demanded versus changes in demand. When we're talking about quantity demanded, a change in quantity demanded is a movement from one point to another point along the same demand curve. This is only caused by a change in the price of the good itself. Like I said, the law of demand. When prices go up, our quantity demanded goes down, and vice versa. It's a different point on the same curve. The curve does not move or shift or change. However, we do see changes in demand as a whole. This is a shift of the entire demand curve, either to the right or to the left. A shift to the right means greater demand. A shift to the left means less demand. These are caused by what we're going to call demand factors. They're all non-price factors, meaning it does not include things like the price of the good itself. Different demand curves will move to the right or the left depending on the change in these factors. Let's practice what we know. Here, let's look at the market for Oreos. The quantity of Oreos is on the x-axis. The price of Oreos is on the y-axis. We're currently consuming at point A, where Oreos cost $3 a box, and I would like to buy 4 boxes. If the price of Oreos fall, this will be a movement along the demand curve. Let's say the box goes from $3 down to $2. This will simply bring us to a new point on the same demand curve, point B, where now, because of the law of demand, when Oreos get cheaper, I buy more of them. Yum. Here's another example like that. Let's look at the market for movie tickets. quantity on the x-axis, price on the y. Currently, movie tickets sell for $15. And at that price, I would like to see 3 movies at point A. If they were to increase the price of movie tickets, say to $20, my law of demand tells me that when movies are more expensive to go to, I'll see fewer of them. And so this is a movement from point A to point B along the same demand curve. This is a change in quantity demanded. Instead of seeing 3 movies, I'll now see only 2. Changes in demand are different. These are due to exogenous non-price factors that impact the market as a whole. Here's an example where we're looking at the market for cantaloupe. Along the demand curve, we can see that the market for cantaloupe obeys the law of demand when prices and quantity demanded move in opposite directions, given by the downward sloping demand curve. Let's say I'm currently consuming at this black point on the blue curve. Cantaloupes sell for $5 a piece, and so I would like to buy 6 of them. However, there may be an event that happens that decreases my overall demand for cantaloupe at every price. This would be a shift to the left. For example, let's say I heard on the news that there's a health warning out telling me that there's been a bad batch of cantaloupe. That health warning may actually lead me to demanding fewer cantaloupe overall, no matter what their price were. And so this would be a shift of the demand curve to the left, indicating that we've had a decrease in demand for cantaloupe. On the other hand, if I heard a news show say that there's a new medical study showing that cantaloupe lowers cholesterol, this is really good for me, perhaps I would buy more cantaloupe at any given price because of the health benefits that I'm perceiving that I would get from it. This would be an increase in demand, which shifts the demand to the right at every price, indicating an increase in demand for cantaloupe. So let's talk about those factors. They actually can fall into one of 6 categories. The first category is a change in income, but we have to be careful here because the way that income impacts our demand depends on whether the good is a normal good or an inferior good. A normal good is defined as a good that I would buy more of if I have more income. So anything that when I have more money, I would tend to buy more of. Think clothing, shoes, good food, vacations, things like that. On the other hand, an inferior good is a good that we would buy less of when we have more money. For example, when I was a college student, I ate a lot of ramen noodles, but now since I've had a full-time job, I eat very few ramen noodles. The more money I had, the lower my demand for that product. That means that ramen noodles, as you see here, are an inferior good to me. The second factor that can affect demand is in the price, not in the good itself, but of a related good. Now, there are basically 2 relationships that goods can have with one another. They could be complements or they could be substitutes. When 2 goods are used together, they're complements. Here, they've given the example of pib and red vines, something that you like to eat together. You might also think about socks and shoes or peanut butter and jelly. You might think about laptops and software. I'm trying to give non-food examples, although food examples come to me pretty easily. These are things that are used together. So you have to think through the story of what happens. Let's say here, you like to consume pib and red vines together. Red vines get more expensive. Well, that means that the law of demand tells you you'll want to consume fewer red vines. And since you consume red vines with pib, if you're consuming fewer red vines, you'll also consume less pib. So in the market for pib, we can be affected by the price of red vines. Let's look at the other example, substitutes. Substitutes that are goods that can be used in place of one another. Oftentimes, these are branded versions of the same product. Think Domino's Pizza versus Pizza Hut. If Pizza Hut was to raise the price of their pizza, you're going to want to consume less pizza from Pizza Hut. That's just law of demand. That's a change in quantity demanded. However, if you're consuming less pizza from Pizza Hut, you may actually substitute in pizza from Domino's. And so when Pizza Hut gets more expensive, we might see demand shift in a positive way for demand for Domino's pizza. So let's look at this on a graph. This is the market for peanut butter on the left and the market for jelly on the right. The event, the factor, is that the price of peanut butter increases. On the left, in the market for peanut butter, we see that this results in a change in quantity demanded. It's a movement from the point A, where peanut butter is $3, to point B, where peanut butter is $4. When peanut butter gets more expensive, we buy less peanut butter. But then there's a secondary effect in the market for jelly. Because we consume peanut butter and jelly together as complements, if we're consuming less peanut butter, then we'll also consume less jelly overall, no matter what the price of jelly is. So this is going to be a shift or a change in demand for jelly, where the demand curve will move to the left. Let's move on to another factor that affects demand. The third one is a change in tastes and preferences. This is essentially how much you like or dislike a product. It may be because a good becomes more fashionable or potentially goes out of style, but this could also happen seasonally as things come in or out of season. You could think about, for example, I'm more likely to be drinking hot chocolate in the winter than I am in the summer. This would be a change in my tastes and preferences for the good that changes with the season. It could also be affected by, obviously, what other people are consuming. The last three we like to put together because they're more macro level effects. The first one is price expectations. Even though a price doesn't change today, if we anticipate a change in the price of a good in the future, it may actually impact our consumption today based on what we think the price might be tomorrow. Another one is the number of buyers in a market. The more individual buyers there are, the greater market demand will be. And so, because you're just adding up individual demand, so more buyers means greater demand, fewer buyers, less demand. And this is actually going to be a shifter because the number of buyers is not impacted by the price of the good itself. Finally, taxes and subsidies. Taxes on consumer goods, consumption taxes, raise the cost to consumer and lower demand for that product. Think about taxes on cigarettes or gasoline. Subsidies, on the other hand, are where the government provides incentives in the form of rebates or even money back for purchasing certain products. We actually experience subsidies as if it was a boost to our income. And so this actually encourages us to buy more. Let's practice what we know. Here's the market for the McDonald's Big Mac. Quantity on the x-axis, price on the y. If the price of a Burger King Whopper was to fall, this is a demand factor because this is the price of a related good. The relationship between a Big Mac and a Whopper is that they're substitutes, right? They could substitute one for the other. So if a Burger King Whopper gets cheaper, we're going to buy fewer Big Macs. This will shift the demand curve to the left. Here's the market for steak dinners. Quantity on the X, price on the Y. The event is that I get a raise at my job. The factor here is income. Steak is a normal good, not an inferior good. If I know that I have more money, I'm more likely to buy steak, although personally, I'm actually a vegetarian. But for the sake of this example, let's say my income goes up, my demand for steak shifts to the right, meaning I want more of it. Here is a funny example, generic cheese. So this is where it's like this, the brandedness is the thing that matters. So this is like the very generic, like Stop and Shop version, I suppose, of cheese. So you get a pay raise at your job. I think what the textbook author is insinuating here is that generic cheese is an inferior good. It's not something that I would want more of if I have more money. In fact, I may even want less of it, because if I have a pay raise at my job, I'm going to substitute away from that generic cheese towards the fancier stuff. So when I get a pay raise, that's an income boost, and this inferior good is going to move to the left. Here's the market for pizza: quantity on the X, price on the Y. The price of my favorite beverage falls. So this is like whatever it is you drink with pizza, whether that be soda or seltzer or beer, your choice. But that beverage that you like to drink with pizza gets cheaper. These two things are complements because we consume them together. So for me, if beer got cheaper, I'd drink more beer and I'd want to pair it with more pizza. The demand curve goes to the right. Here's an example market for oranges. Doctors discover that oranges cure baldness. A lot of people might be tempted to increase the amount of oranges in their diet here. This is a change in tastes and preferences. So since it's a positive change, we should see the demand curve move to the right. The following questions are all going to consider the same market. Let's consider the market for Pepsi. We want to look at the change in quantity demanded versus the change in demand. So assuming that you like Pepsi and your income increases, what do we expect to happen? Income is a non-price shifting factor. And if we like it and we have more money, it means demand will increase. What if the price of Pepsi itself decreases? Now, this is just going to move us from one point to another on the exact same demand curve. So if the price decreases, our quantity demanded of Pepsi will increase. Assume the price of Coke decreases. This is an exogenous factor, the price of a related good. If Coke gets cheaper and Coke and Pepsi are substitutes, we're going to lower our demand for Pepsi. This is now a more generic question. Let's suppose the price of good X increases. In terms of demand, what is the result? Whenever you're talking about the price of the good itself, this is a quantity demand question. And all you have to remember is the law of demand. So if the price of any good increases, that's going to lower the quantity demanded. Oh, that should have been, there we go, decreases. There we go. Now let's say we have two goods that are substitutes. If the price of one increases, what happens in the market for the other? Well, if they're substitutes and one gets expensive, you're going to buy the other one instead. So we should see demand increase. Whew, that was a lot of information. Let's pause here so you can go back and take notes. I also encourage you to think through your own examples of goods that are relevant in your life, things that you consume day to day, where you could kind of think through, oh, what would I do if my income changed? What would I do if the price of a related good changed? Walk yourself through the story step by step. Often we have our own intuition about these things without having to memorize movement of prices and quantities. This is something we live and breathe every day. So take the time with it and work through your own examples. In the next part of this video, I'll pick up with the supply side, and then we can put the two into a single model and look how it affects equilibrium. I'll see you then.